Prabhupada Jaya, Prabhupada Jaya, Prabhupada Jaya, Prabhupada. Jai Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajikacharya Ashtatarasata Shishimaj Divine Grace of Bhaichanaravindra Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Shri Radha Gopinath Bhagavan Ki Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Jai Nithai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bol Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto number 3, Chapter 23, Devahuti's Lamentation, Text number 12. Maitreya Uvacha Priyaya Priyamanvichan Kardamo Yoga Astita Vimanam Kamagam Kshatas Taryeva Virachikarat Maitreya Uvacha Priyaya Priyamanvichan Kardama Yogamastitaha Vimanam Kamagam Kshatas Taryeva Virachikarat Maitreya Uvacha Priyaya Priyamanvichan Kardama Yogamastitaha Vimanam Kamagam Shatas Taryeva Virachikarat Maitreya Uvacha Priyaya Priyamanvichan Kardamo Yogamastitaha Vimanam Kamagam Chatas Tarhi Eva Virachikarat Maitreya Uvacha Priyaya Priyamanvichan Kardamo Yogamastitaha Vimanam Kamagam Shatas Tarhi Eva Virachikarat. Word for word, Maitreya, the great sage Maitreya, Uvacha said, Priyaya, of his beloved wife, Priyam, the pleasure, Anvichan, seeking, Kardama, the sage Kardama, Yogam, yogic power, Astitaha, exercised, Vimanam, an airplane, Kamagam, moving at will, Shataha, O Vidura, Tarhi, instantly, Eva, quiet, Avirachikarat, he produced. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Abhay Chanaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation, Maitreya continued, O Vidura, seeking to please his beloved wife, the sage Kardama exercised his yogic power and instantly produced an aerial mansion that could travel at his will. Purport: here the words Yogam Astitaha are significant. The sage Kardama was completely perfect in yoga. As a result of real yoga practice, there are 8 kinds of perfection. The yogi can become smaller than the smallest, greater than the greatest, or lighter than the lightest. He can achieve anything he likes. He can create even a planet. He can establish influence over anyone, etc. In this way, yogic perfection is achieved, and after this, one can achieve the perfection of spiritual life. Thus, it was not very wonderful for Kardama Muni to create a mansion in the air, according to his own desire, to fulfill the desire of his beloved wife. He had once created the palace, which is described in the following verses. Om Jnanatimurandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahaganat Naganatanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangam Langayate Girim Yat Kripatamaham Vande Shri Gurun Tirtharanam Paramananda Madhavam Shri Chaitaneshwaram. Hare Krishna. So we're continuing the pastimes of Kardama Muni and Devahuti, of how after Devahuti had performed such wonderful, faithful service unto the lotus feet of Kardama Muni, her husband, Kardama Muni reciprocated with her, being obliged by her surrendered and selfless attitude of service, that he decided that it was time to execute the order of his spiritual master, Lord Brahma, and to also satisfy Devahuti, who also was one in intention, or one in motive, one in desire, in producing children. So Maitreya Muni will now begin to establish a wonderful environment in which he can produce or conceive children within Devahuti. And we heard about this yesterday, the technical details of how a wife produces a male, and rather how the combination of wife and husband produces male child or a female child based on the intention, based on the environment, especially one's effect on one's consciousness. Prabhupada says here, when the passion of the woman is greater, the chance of a girl is being born. When the passion of the man is greater, there's a possibility of a son. Devahuti wanted the passion of her husband to be increased by the arrangement mentioned in the Kama Shastra. She wanted him to instruct her in that ways, and she also requested that he arrange for a suitable house, because the hermitage in which Kardama Muni was living was very simple and completely in the mode of goodness, and there was less possibility of passions being aroused in his heart. So Devahuti's plan is such that she wants to produce a child, especially a son. Now, Kardama Muni exercises his yogic power in this verse, and he produces, in the next coming verses, he produces a mansion, and what's inside this mansion, how this mansion is decorated, the opulence of the mansion. In fact, he creates living beings that are present within the mansion. So you can see the power that Kardama Muni has. Prabhupada makes the point here that yoga means to connect, and real yoga doesn't mean simply gymnastics, as Prabhupada says. As we see nowadays, hot yoga, cold yoga, this yoga, that yoga. Yoga means to control the mind so that you can engage in Krishna's service. So it begins with yama and niyama, so do's and don'ts. And naturally, it progresses all the way to the stage of samadhi, or complete absorption in the Supreme. But that's not the complete end goal, because once one becomes absorbed or focused on the Supreme, then one engages in the service of the Lord. Prabhupada actually mentions this here. In this way, yogic perfection is achieved. Okay, so that's after he practices yoga. In this way, yogic perfection is achieved, going through the Ashtanga yoga process. And after this, one can achieve the perfection of spiritual life. So Prabhupada is very clearly making a distinction between what is yogic perfection and what is spiritual perfection. And this is something we need to keep in mind. In fact, in the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, in Uddhava Gita section, there Krishna makes, he actually goes to quite great extents, he goes to a greater extent to explain to Uddhava that yogic powers are not required by a devotee. In fact, just by practicing devotional service, yogic powers are automatically there. But the devotee does not use them because he or she sees no need in using them. And he explains to Uddhava the different types of yogic siddhis. And towards the end of this section, it's just a few verses, maybe 10 verses at max. There Krishna mentions to Uddhava that, in fact, to be able to get these siddhis, they need to meditate on me. That is the crux of the ultimate end. If they don't meditate on Krishna, if they meditate on the impersonal form of Krishna, the gigantic manifestation of the material world of Virat Rupa, and through that, the impersonal form of the Lord, then their perfections will be limited. It won't be of a greater value like that of a devotee. In fact, Krishna says, no one possesses as much as I do. Therefore, he's known as Yogeshwara, whereas Lord Shiva is known as Yogishwara. It's meaning that Krishna is the master of all mystic potencies, and of all yogis, Lord Shiva is the master. So, in this pastime in this connection of between Lord Shiva and Lord Krishna, we see the example given by Nard Muni to Yudhishthira Maharaj at the end of the 7th canto. There, Nard Muni wants to explain to Yudhishthira Maharaj the qualities and the potencies of Lord Krishna and how wonderful he is. In fact, that he is the source, the reservoir of all mystic potencies. And he gives the example of the story of how Mayadhanava, one of the great magicians of the demoniac race, he created 3 wonderful airplanes known as Tripura. And the goal of the demons, of course, is that they want to occupy the demigod's position. Now you have to understand, according to the 5th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, the residences of the demons, namely the Danavas and the Daityas, is within the crust or within the Bhumandala. And they exist below Jambudvip. And living in this situation is explained, it's a subterranean heavenly planet. So they enjoy heavenly pleasures. Unfortunately, due to the darkness, unfortunately due to the eulogious activities, they're never satisfied. And they're always in anxiety because death is always around the corner. In fact, it's mentioned that they're so anxious that death is coming at any stage. And how does death come? It's mentioned that Sudarshan Chakra is always there. And without any notice, Sudarshan Chakra will end their life. They're in constant fear and anxiety. Compared to the demigods, when they perform their activities in the mode of goodness, they're enjoying according to the Shastric injunctions. And their enjoyment produces not so much fear and anxiety as the demons. But here's the thing, because it's the material world, there's always fear and anxiety. So the demigods are constantly in fear that demons will come and try to usurp their position or try and conquer the heavenly planet. So in this case, the demons somehow or other manifested through the agency of Maya, Danava, that this magician was able, because of yogic siddhis, this magician was able to produce 3 wonderful airplanes. And it's mentioned these wonderful airplanes were very big, enough to conquer a planetary system. And one was made of gold, 1 silver, and 1 iron. And each of these demons flew them in the 3 planetary systems, the upper, middle, and lower, and tried to conquer. And it's mentioned that they were successful. They were on the verge of success, of completely conquering the 3 worlds. But that's when the demigods pleaded to Lord Shiva to come forward. And it's mentioned that Lord Shiva meditated on Lord Krishna. Although he tried through his own weapons, he was not successful in destroying. But then when meditating on Lord Krishna, it's mentioned that Lord Shiva even became dejected. But after meditating on Lord Krishna, Krishna provided him the chariot, Krishna provided him the bow and arrows to be able to destroy this Tripura. So therefore Lord Shiva got the name Tripurari. So in this pastime we see how it is by the mercy of Lord Krishna that even Lord Shiva has mystic potencies. And then of course we read in the end of the 10th canto of how and why Lord Shiva's devotees, they get all mystic powers and mystic material perfections, success in all life. But how is it that the devotees of Lord Krishna, although Gopinath himself is the master, the source of everything that exists, even of mystic cities, what to speak of mystic cities, even simple mystic opulences, why is it that the devotees of Lord Krishna are poverty-stricken? That they don't have any material opulences. Why is that? So then Sukadeva Goswami explains to Parikshit Maharaj that actually you see that the devotees of Lord Krishna are possessing all mystic potencies. They are possessing all wealth. And Lord Krishna, he satisfies them not in the sense of material sense gratification, but always makes sure that their spiritual advancement, that their spiritual credits will always be protected. That is the true wealth. In fact, Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita mentions 3 types of wealth: Krishna, Krishna Bhakti, and Prem. It's mentioned these 3 things: Krishna himself, Krishna's devotional service, and the love of Krishna. This is the Mahadhan. This is our treasure. And this is the greatest treasure that you can achieve in all of existence. Because it's mentioned that to achieve this great treasure, you need to let go of all material sense gratification, all desires for material enjoyment. And how do we see that? Again mentioned in the 10th canto, the Rasa Leela section, where Prabhupada makes this point that if Krishna is an ordinary living entity, and he's performing the Rasa Leela like any other conditioned soul, then how is it that the yogis give up all types of sense gratification? They give up all types of enjoyment and focus and control the mind on Krishna's lotus feet to achieve perfection. Then how is it that Krishna can be performing conditional activities, material sense gratification? It doesn't make sense. If you have to meditate on Krishna to get rid of material enjoyment, the disease, the hrid rog, the disease of material attachment, then how is it that the Lord can be of the same quality of material nature? It's not possible. It's like, it's not the right context, but it's like, going to take a shower, but in a dirty pool. You won't be successful. Right? But, as Prabhupada says, the unbound can help the bound. If you are tied up, how can someone else help you who is tied up? Unless they are untied. So in the same way, Krishna is completely transcendental to material existence. And being transcendental to material existence, from him everything emanates, by him everything is maintained, and everything is destroyed within him, annihilated by him, and everything stays within him. Janmadi yasyataha. So then, this is the situation of Lord Krishna. And this is a situation of mystic perfection. So mystic perfection is simply a insignificant thing in front of Krishna. In fact, Bilva Mangala Thakur explains that Mukti Mukati Lanjali Sevate Asman, that being a devotee of the Lord, being absorbed in the Lord's service, is so great that even Mukti Devi herself, the personification of liberation, comes to the doorstep of the devotee asking for service. Let me serve you. How may I serve you? This is the nature of a devotee. You see, the devotee is so powerful that even liberation itself is coming. The devotee is so powerful that the yogis spend thousands and tens of thousands of years meditating on the supersoul. But that person is right here. The devotee just simply comes to the temple and sees Shri Shri Radha Gopinath. So the devotee is extremely powerful in that sense. And you see, according to Shastra, that the pure devotees of the Lord, how powerful they are. We can take examples and see and compare the quality of the devotee's potency with that of a mystic siddhi. Take, for example, on this side, on the mystic potency or the yogi side, we have the famous example of Vishwamitra and Menaka. Vishwamitra, Ramba, and then Vishwamitra falling down again on the third time. How Vishwamitra wanted to become greater than Vasishta, and he performed tens and thousands of years of yagya or penance in the forest, and he fell down to Menaka. Right? It's mentioned that after he got lost due to being attracted, due to lusty desires, then he made up his mind that I won't fall down again. And he performed tapasya again for tens and thousands of years. And then another heavenly damsel was sent by Indra by the name of Ramba. And she was above him, and she poured, or she started dropping flower petals on his head. And immediately he thought, I'm not going to fall for this trick again. But then he fell for anger. And out of anger, he cursed her to become stone. So he performed another great step in the opposite direction. His anger completely destroyed all of his yogic credits. So then again, another 10,000 years. But in the background, what was happening was that there was this one very foolish person by the name of Trishanku. And this king, he was a king, he wanted to attain the heavenly planets simply by the strength of some yagya that he could perform in this lifetime, rather than by his pious credits. So then he thought, let me ask Vishishta, my Kula Guru, the family guru, that you perform a yagya and you send me to heavenly planets. And then Vishishta said, that I can't do that. You don't have the right. You don't have the right requirements. You don't have the pious credits to enter the heavenly planets. So, being upset, frustrated, and angry, he went and approached Vishishta's sons, and he criticized Vishishta in front of his sons. And the sons got extremely upset, and they said, "We're not going to send you to heaven. In fact, we're going to curse you to become a Shudra because of your low mentality, your horrible mentality." And immediately he became. It's mentioned that his gold ornaments became like iron. And his complexion became very dirty, very darkish. He became very horrible or very ugly to look at. And when he approached the kingdom, all his children, his wives, his ministers kicked him out because they could not recognize him. So then he approached Vishwamitra. And he told Vishwamitra, I want to do this. And Vishwamitra said, I don't have time for this. In fact, you're not qualified. Leave me alone. And then Trishanku then told him that, okay, Vishishta couldn't do it, and it looks like you couldn't do it as well. And that triggered Vishwamitra, because the whole reason why he was performing mystic tapasya was to defeat Vishishta. Anyway, he performs yagya, and he tries to send Trishanku to the heavenly planets. And in the heavenly planets, Indra, seeing the situation through thunderbolt, and sends him down. And in this way, Vishwamitra keeps sending him up, and Indra keeps sending him out, keeps sending him down. And Trishanku, being in such a difficult situation, begs that you please leave me alone, I don't want any of this. And then Vishwamitra then tells him that, no, my mystic potencies can put you there. And immediately through his mystic potencies, as Prabhupada says here, he can create even a planet. He created a whole heavenly planet, heavenly planetary system for Trishanku. But then that started going out of control. And in the end, Vishwamitra took shelter of Lord Vishnu. And Lord Vishnu, being satisfied with Vishwamitra's shelter, or his surrender rather, then Lord Vishnu righted the situation, and he even said that Trishanku can live there in this secondary heavenly planet. But Trishanku lives there upside down. So you can see this is the potency, or this is the extent of mystic perfection. That in the end, one still needs to take shelter of Lord Krishna. In fact, it was just full of obstacles, full of troubles the whole way through. Another example of mystic perfection that gets in the way is that pride, and that comes from Saubhari Muni. And how Saubhari Muni thought he was greater than Garuda, that he could curse the eternal associate of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But then as we see later on, he comes to his senses and he achieves perfection in the end. So this is the extent, or this is the situation of one who has mystic potency. Now let's speak of a devotee. And the classical example of yogic power against devotional service is of Durvasa Muni against Ambrish Maharaj. You know, you have these soccer world matches, Iraq versus this country, Australia versus that country. Ambrish Maharaj versus Durvasa Muni, right? No. Actually, it was one-sided. It was just Durvasa Muni versus Ambrish Maharaj. Ambrish Maharaj was too busy in devotional service. So what happened was that after, we know the story, Durvasa Muni, out of ego, out of pride, that he could not tolerate hearing how a kshatriya, a grihastha, was being glorified throughout the kingdom for his wonderful penances, wonderful qualities, wonderful activities. And so Durvasa Muni wanted to test him. So Durvasa Muni, of course, tried to chastise him by sending a demon. But then Lord Krishna protected Ambrish Maharaj. And we know the story how Durvasa Muni, he went all over the three worlds. He got a special permit to even enter into Vaikuntha Loka. And there Lord Vishnu takes the opportunity to explain the standard or the position of his devotees. So, of course, Durvasa Muni comes down, takes a piece of humble pie, takes shelter of Ambrish Maharaj and begs for forgiveness. And you can see the whole time Ambrish Maharaj, what was he thinking? He was thinking, it's because of me, it's all my fault. I could not serve Durvasa Muni properly. Ambrish Maharaj was not thinking, I've got Sudarshan Chakra and I can do anything I like, I can go and enjoy the three worlds, I can destroy this guy, he's disturbing my devotional service, like that. No. Ambrish Maharaj was Ambrish Maharaj till the end, a pure devotee. Despite having so much opulences at his will, still he never forgot his position as a pure devotee of the Lord, rather as an insignificant devotee of the Lord, right? So that's one example. Another example of how pure devotees have all the mystic opulences. You can read this in Chaitanya Charitamrita, in Chaitanya Lila. This is in the pastimes of, there are three of them, Narottam Das Thakur, Srinivasacharya, and his name was Dukhi Krishna Das. I forgot third name. Shyamananda Pandit. In that, he has a disciple by the name of Rasikananda Acharya. And there's a book on his pastimes. And Rasikananda Acharya, he was mainly in Orissa. His preaching ground was Puri. And it's mentioned that in one particular village where he was preaching, they had all taken him as their guru. And all the villagers were following his instructions. At one particular point in time, early in the morning, all the villagers somehow they gathered in the village square, in the local area, because a yogi had appeared. And when the yogi had appeared, he started performing mystic powers. He started floating in the sky. He started performing all mystic deeds. And all the villagers were shocked. He was bringing this out of nowhere, gold out of nowhere, this, showing his mystic opulences. And suddenly one of the disciples of Rasikananda Acharya, I think it was, he came, Rasikananda Thakur. His disciples started running to him. And at that time, the Acharya was brushing his teeth early in the morning. And he's telling, Gurudev, the mystic yogi has come here into the city, into the village, and he's performing all these wonderful activities. And so then Rasikananda thought, he said, yes, okay, no problem. And so he sent his disciple away. And then another disciple came and said, no, Gurudev, he's here. You should come and see him. And Rasikananda Thakur said, no, it's okay, it's fine. Leave it. And then again, villagers started coming, more and more. And so then Rasikananda Acharya immediately threw his eucalyptus twig down, stood on it, and he flew around the whole village. And he came back to the same spot, picked up his twig, started brushing his teeth, and told everyone, just chant Hare Krishna. So you see very rare glimpses of devotees using their opulences. Because how do they feel? They feel that their opulences are useless, or rather insignificant, not needed. They're obstacles in one sense to one's devotional service. Because one will become unnecessarily proud. Oh, I have this, I have that, I can do this, I can do that. I no longer need to take shelter of Krishna. Finished. That point in time where one's shelter deviates from Krishna's lotus feet, everything becomes finished. There was another example that came to mind. I'm forgetting it now. You see, what to speak of mystic perfections, you see even in the example of the names are not coming to mind. Srimati Radharani's father, Vishabhanu, appeared in Chaitanya Lila as... What's his name? Anyway, this particular devotee is famous for, he would have all material opulences in his home. Right? He would have servants serving him betel nut. His hair would be oiled. He would have wearing all types of ornaments and jewelry. He'd be sitting on the best of beds. And he'd be enjoying in this way. And when Srivas Thakur took Gadadhar Pandit to see him, Gadadhar Pandit thought, why have you come to make me see a materialist? But then when Srivas Thakur started singing, specifically the verse that Aho Bhaki Stanya Aho Stanakalakutam, that famous verse where Uddhava meditates on the glorious compassion of Lord Krishna, immediately this particular devotee faints and starts rolling around in ecstasy, not caring for all types of material enjoyment. So you can see that in this particular devotee, it's a very famous devotee. I can't believe I'm forgetting his name. Do you remember? It'll come. Anyway, so what to speak of material enjoyment, what to speak of yogic perfections, devotees do not care for such temporary enjoyment, temporary satisfaction, temporary opulences, temporary facilities. Rather, their focus, their sole motive is to simply give Radha Gopinath pleasure. This is the nature of a devotee. And so Prabhupada's mentioning here, thus it was not very wonderful for Kardama Muni to create a mansion in the air according to his own desire, to fulfill the desire of his beloved wife. He had once created the palace which is described in the following verses. So then it reminds me of the story that Ramai Maharaj was mentioning a couple of days, actually exactly last week, how he was explaining that they're pure devotees. Their consciousness is completely absorbed in the Lord, but they also know how to use the material energy to be able to fully engage in the Lord's service. Did you find his name? It's going to kill us until we find out the name. Yeah. So here, it was a very nice story given by Ramai Maharaj. He was explaining that in Sri Rangam there was a devotee who was very accustomed to live very simply. In fact, his clothes were always torn and he would always stitch them. He would never go for new ones. In fact, whenever people threw away old clothing, he would pick that up, stitch it, and then rewear it himself. Because he was not so much absorbed in external appearances, his constant absorption was in Sri Ranganath, Lord Vishnu. So, at one particular point in time, Lord Shiva and Parvati were flying in the sky. And passing through the area, it's mentioned that anyone who takes even the shelter of their shadow become materially opulent. They become materially opulent. So, seeing this shadow, this devotee stepped out of the way. And Parvati Devi became very confused. why is he doing that? People are always absorbed in trying to appropriate us to get some sort of material enjoyment. But how come he stepped out of the shadow when it's coming voluntarily? So she tells her husband, you go and find out what's happening. So you remember the story, how Lord Shiva goes back and forward, how she says you go and give him benediction of the three worlds, and he doesn't even bother looking at Lord Shiva. Then he says, I will give you mystic perfection. He still doesn't bother looking at Lord Shiva. Then he says, I'll give liberation. And he slightly turns his head, can you give me entrance into the spiritual abode of Lord Vishnu? And he said, no, I can't even give you that actually. I mean, he gives, what was it? It was enjoyment, mystic, heavenly planets, enjoyment in this material world, in this particular planet, heavenly planet, pleasures in the heavenly planets, and then finally mystic potencies. When he asks, I can give you all types of mystic potencies, this particular devotee didn't even bother looking. He just simply slightly cocked his head and said, can you give me liberation? And Lord Shiva was like, no, I can't give you that. Only Lord Vishnu can, Lord Raghunath. So he said, I don't want anything. Then I don't want anything. You can continue on your way. So then Lord Shiva blesses him. He blesses him, may you be known as Bhakti Sar. That you are absorbed, may you always be continued absorbed in Ranganath's service, in Ranganath's devotional service. And so immediately the devotee looked up and said, yes, that benediction I want. So you can see what exactly is on the mind of a devotee. And to be able to understand this in our context, we can understand in the context of how even nowadays as devotees sometimes we develop, or sometimes the desire creeps up from within the dirt of the heart, right? It suddenly creeps up that I want this particular enjoyment, I want this particular facility, I want this, I want that. If I was rich, then I'd be able to serve Krishna better. If I was in this way, if I was in that way, then I'd be able to perform devotional service better. But we need to understand that actually the external facilities do not really matter. What really matters is one's shelter, how one takes shelter of Lord Krishna, one's devotional attitude. Because Krishna will determine what your capacity is. Gopinath will determine what you require, what you don't require. Because you may think that if I get more money, I'll serve Lord Krishna. I'd come and serve Radha Gopinath more sincerely. But it may even take you away from them. So Gopinath is no fool. He knows exactly how to take care of us. And so therefore, when it comes to desiring mystic perfections, material opulences, we need to understand that we need to put it at Krishna's lotus feet. We need to just submit our appeal that, Shri Shri Radha Gopinath, actually I don't know what's good for me. Actually I don't know what's really good for me at this point in time or in the future. So you please give me your blessing so that I may be engaged in your devotional service eternally. And this type of prayer is actually the most intelligent type of prayer. As Prabhupada explains that when one goes to the Supreme Personality of Godhead asking for material benedictions up to the extent of yogic powers, one is considered to be foolish. And he gives the example of how an old lady was walking through the forest with a heavy burden on her head, a pile of wood and twigs and sticks rather. And while walking she trips and falls and the sticks fall. But then at that particular point in time, she cries out Lord Krishna's name. She cries out to Lord Krishna. And immediately Gopinath appears before her and says, yes, what would you like? And what does she ask him? She asks him, please put this load of wood back on my head, these sticks on my head. It's quite foolish if you think about it. Another example is given of how this story is given in so many different contexts, old wine in new bottles. It's like you can take it in the extent of how one particular brahmana or one particular person, he somehow or other serves the king in a dire situation. Or you can take it in an example of Kali Yuga, how a person, a taxi driver, somehow or other serves a businessman who is in dire need. So this story has been rehashed, reversioned. But basically how the king in a very difficult situation gets lost in a forest and how this particular brahmana finds him. and how the Brahmana, after finding him, takes care of him so well that the king tells him that, whatever you want, I'm willing to satisfy your desire. So whenever if you have anything you want, then you may come and ask me. I'm willing to satisfy your desires. So then this particular Brahmana consulted with his wife, and he then went and met the king. And when the king, like I said, there's many versions of the story. The crux of it is that the king asked him for many benediction, and this Brahmana said, I don't want anything. And the king said, you can ask so many things. You can ask so many things. So then this Brahmana asked him that all I ask is that you please come to my place and allow me to serve you lunch. And the king is completely bewildered. How come? Such a simple, you could ask for so many things. But the Brahmana, or this particular person, was extremely intelligent. Why? Because for the king to be able to go to somewhere and take his prasadam, it's not an ordinary event. The king goes to an opulent place. A king goes to a very majestic place. So therefore, this particular person, the Brahmana, whoever he may be, was extremely intelligent that he was able to bring the king there, and he was able to also get all types of opulences. Here's another simple example. The servant of a very wealthy business person or merchant, do they enjoy more than the merchant, or does the merchant enjoy more? Which of the two in this relationship enjoy the most? Between the business person and their servant, who enjoys more? Why? Yeah. So Radhesham Prabhu gives this example, I think Prabhupada also, that when the servants cook a magnificent feast for their master, because of anxiety, the master can only eat this much. Even if they may not have anxiety, their stomach can only take this much. And the leftovers, who finishes them? Who wipes them out? The servants. Right? So the servants actually enjoy more by their service to the master. So in the same way, Prabhupada says, the devotees of the Lord, actually they are more opulent than the Lord in that sense. But of course, the devotees never take it that way. They always remain humble servitors of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So here, the point I wanted to mention, and Prabhupada's mentioning here, that, and I like this so much, that Prabhupada's glorifying the perfection of yoga, the mystic siddhis, and he immediately brings it crashing down. He says here that as a result of real yoga practice, actually Prabhupada doesn't waste time chastising the current yoga system like we usually hear, but Prabhupada just simply says, the real yoga practice, there are 8 kinds of perfection, and then he says, in this way yogic perfection is achieved, and after this one can achieve perfection of spiritual life. So that very nicely, I like that sentence very much. It very nicely sums up the mood of a devotee. How we're simply absorbed in Krishna's service. We don't care so much for our sense gratification, we simply care for Krishna's pleasure. So I'll end here, if there are any comments or questions. Anything? Nothing? The name of the devotee. We'll find out the name. Yeah, it's a very famous devotee. It's like one of those days where it doesn't come in the mind. And when you read it, you're like, Anyway, thank you very much. Granthuraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Shri Shri Radha Gopinath Bhagavan ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Nithai Gaur Premanande, Hari Hari Bol.